You know, everybody that I've ever worked with is a part of my being here tonight to accept this award.
For generations of TV lovers, it's the quintessential American sitcom. A cramped Brooklyn apartment, a frustrated bus driver with dreams bigger than his paycheck, and his sharp, patient wife who always had the last word. The Honeymooners wasn't just a show, it was a piece of American life, a nightly ritual that filled living rooms with laughter. The on-screen chemistry between Jackie Gleason as the loud-mouthed Ralph Cramden and Audrey Meadow as the unflappable Alice was legendary, a perfect comedic storm. To the world, they were Ralph and Alice, a duo whose timing and connection felt absolutely real, but what if the easy chemistry the world saw was only half the story? What if the laughter we remember was masking a much more complicated reality? For years, Audrey Meadow, the woman who stood toe-to-toe with the man they called the Great One, played her part perfectly, both on and off the screen. She was a consummate professional, protecting the legacy of the show and the man at its center. But in her later years, long after the applause faded, she began to speak with a quiet and powerful honesty. In her memoir and interviews, she didn't offer a sensational tell-all, that was never her way. Instead, she shared a perspective that recontextualized everything fans thought they knew about Jackie Gleason and the beloved show they created. She spoke of a man whose genius was undeniable, but whose volatile and controlling nature turned the set of one of television's most beloved comedies into a high-stakes pressure cooker. This is the story of what was really happening when the cameras stopped rolling. To understand the weight of Audrey's perspective, you have to appreciate the sheer size of the illusion she helped create. In the 1950s, television was still a new frontier, and The Honeymooners was one of its crown jewels. Airing from 1955 to 1956, the classic 39 episodes became an indelible part of American culture. The show's audience during its initial run was massive for its time, but its real power was in syndication, where it was eventually seen by tens of millions, cementing its legendary status. The premise was simple, a look at working-class life, about dreams and disappointments, set in a sparse Bensonhurst apartment that Gleason said was modeled after the one he grew up in. At its heart was the dynamic between Ralph and Alice. Ralph was a volcano of emotion, a schemer convinced he was one idea away from the big time. His iconic threat, bang, zoom, straight to the moon, was always undercut by a deep insecurity and a vulnerability that Gleason pulled off with incredible skill. He was a character you could laugh at, but also root for, and then there was Alice. As played by Audrey Meadow, she was more than a sitcom wife, she was the anchor. With a perfectly timed, razor-sharp comeback, she could dismantle Ralph's most ridiculous fantasies. She was dignified, smart, and had a quiet strength that made her Ralph's equal. Audiences adored her. Fan mail poured in, not just praising her performance, but offering Alice Cramden advice on how to handle her blowhard husband. Their chemistry felt real, crackling with an authenticity other shows just didn't have. When Ralph's anger finally collapsed into a sheepish, "Baby, you're the greatest," the reconciliation felt earned. This dynamic wasn't just good TV, it was revolutionary. The world saw a seamless partnership, a cast that seemed as close off-screen as they were on. It was a comforting illusion. And for decades, Audrey Meadow was its loyal guardian, never letting on that the stability she projected was the polar opposite of the reality she faced every day on set. To get what Audrey Meadow was dealing with, you have to understand the man at the center of it all. John Herbert Gleason wasn't just a star, he was a force of nature. Orson Welles himself dubbed him the Great One, and the nickname stuck because it was true. He was a comedic mastermind who could move an audience from laughter to tears in a heartbeat, but behind that public persona was a man shaped by hardship. Born into poverty in Brooklyn in 1916, his early life was grim. His father abandoned the family when he was a boy, and his mother died when he was a teenager, leaving him on his own. He scraped by working odd jobs, honing his craft in the rough-and-tumble world of vaudeville. That upbringing instilled in him a relentless drive to succeed and an almost desperate need for control. Gleason's talent was matched only by his appetites for fine food, whiskey, and attention. His ego grew with his fame. He demanded the biggest salary and the longest limo, making sure everyone knew who was in charge. Those who knew him described a man of deep contradictions. His stepson recalled that Gleason could crave being the center of a lavish party but also cherished solitude. This duality was the key to his genius, but it was also the source of his volatility. On set, he held all the power, and he used it. He was notoriously competitive and could be intensely jealous. He once admitted to Orson Welles, speaking about his co-star Art Carney, "I smile on the outside, but you should see my insides," when Carney got a big laugh. His writers described a man who seemed to enjoy humiliating his staff, shortchanging them on money, and refusing to credit them for creating the very characters that made him famous. Writer Leonard Stern summed it up for many: "I think he resented us because we did something he knew he needed and couldn't do for himself." This was the man Audrey Meadow worked with every day, brilliant and charming one moment, and unbearably cruel the next. While Jackie Gleason was the undisputed king of his TV empire, the role of Alice Cramden needed an actress with the strength to be his queen. Before Audrey, the part was played by Pert Kelton. Kelton had to leave the role, officially due to health issues, though. Many have since argued that she was a victim of the McCarthy-era blacklist. A new Alice was needed, and finding someone who could hold their own against Gleason was a huge challenge. Enter Audrey Meadow. Born Audrey Cotter in Wuchang, China, in 1922 to American missionary parents, she spent her early childhood abroad before her family returned to the United States. That experience gave her an adaptability that would define her career. By the time the role of Alice came up, Meadows was already a Broadway star. In her 1994 memoir, Love, Alice, she recalled her first meeting with Gleason as surprisingly pleasant. "He was stylishly barbered and groomed," she wrote. Unlike many actors and most comedians, he was not on when he was off stage. However, Gleason's first impression of her was not as good. He flatly rejected her, claiming she was too glamorous to believably play a bus driver's wife. But Audrey was not easily dismissed. In a smart and determined move, she hired a photographer to take pictures of her early one morning with no makeup, messy hair, and a shabby housecoat. The photos were sent to Gleason, and he immediately changed his mind. In those pictures, he saw the resilient, no-nonsense Alice he had envisioned. He gave her the part. But even in victory, a power dynamic was set. Audrey had proven she was right for the role, but she had to do it on his terms. She had won her way into his kingdom, but it was still his kingdom. She was a savvy professional who understood she'd have to walk a fine line, be funny and firm, but never so much that she overshadowed the star. Once filming began, the happy-go-lucky image of the cast dissolved. The set became a pressure cooker, an environment filled with anxiety dictated entirely by Jackie Gleason's moods. He controlled everything: the scripts, the directing, the tone. No line could be changed without his approval. One of Gleason's most stressful habits was his refusal to rehearse. Claiming he had a photographic memory, he'd often read a script only once, just hours before the live taping. He insisted this kept the performances fresh. In reality, it created an atmosphere of terror. The cast rehearsed with a stand-in, never knowing what Gleason might do when he finally stepped on set for the one and only take. Joyce Randolph, who played Trixie, admitted she would break out into a cold sweat. For Audrey, a disciplined Broadway actress, this process was agonizing, leaving her in tears after her first show. The entire set orbited Gleason's moods. A crew member later recalled, "You could feel it in the air the minute Jackie walked in. Everyone would stiffen. This made every day a gamble. He could be warm and complimentary one day, then publicly criticize an actor's performance the next." In her memoir, Audrey described the strain of working with a man whose difficult behavior made him a challenge, a man who treated his partners like rivals. The tension was real. Audrey wasn't just playing a character, she was managing the fragile ego of the man opposite her. She had to be funny, but not funnier than him. She had to be strong, but never confrontational. Their legendary on-screen chemistry was often fueled by their real-life frustrations. That visible tension audiences saw wasn't just brilliant acting, sometimes, it was real. For decades, Audrey Meadow carried this reality privately. She smiled for cameras, gave gracious interviews, and always praised Gleason's talent in public. So why did she stay silent for so long about the atmosphere on set? The answer is a mix of professional strategy, personal resilience, and the realities of being a woman in 1950s Hollywood. First, Audrey was a pragmatist. Speaking out against a star like Jackie Gleason would have been career suicide. In that era, actresses who challenged powerful men were quickly labeled difficult. A single complaint could have ended her career. Beyond that, there was pressure to protect the show itself. The Honeymooners was a national treasure, and Audrey knew how much joy it brought people. She feared that revealing the ugly truth, the tension, the stress, would shatter that illusion for millions of fans. The emotional toll was immense. She would confide in close friends about Gleason's moods and the stress of walking on eggshells. There were times she considered quitting. But CBS executives, knowing she was essential, pressured her to stay. So, she channeled her frustrations into her performance. Alice Cramden's sharp comebacks and steely resolve weren't just great acting, they were a reflection of Audrey's own quiet battle for dignity. The strain was immense, and as some friends later noted, the memory seemed to cast a shadow even years later. It wasn't until she was older, her legacy secure, that she felt free to share the full story. Years went by. The Honeymooners remained a TV classic, and both Audrey and Jackie continued their successful careers, though their paths rarely crossed. Their relationship settled into a respectful, if distant, peace. In June of 1987, Jackie Gleason was dying of cancer. Knowing his time was short, Audrey Meadow picked up the phone. As she later recalled, she first spoke to Gleason's wife, Marilyn, who warned her that Jackie was very weak. Marilyn took the phone to his bedside and said, "Jackie, it's Audrey. It's your Alice." In her telling of the story, the decades of tension seemed to melt away. Speaking to the man who was both her greatest professional partner and her greatest challenge, Audrey said, "Jackie, I just called to tell you I loved you." Gleason mumbled a response she couldn't understand. She continued, "I never thanked you for giving me the part of Alice." And then, something incredible happened. According to Meadows, Gleason's voice came through the phone, not as a frail, dying man, but with his old power and clarity. He responded, "I knew what I was doing." It was a final, precious gift, a moment of validation she had so often been denied. Marilyn later told Audrey that he had been mumbling to everyone else, but for his Alice, he made sure he was heard. Just days later, Jackie Gleason passed away. Audrey was then horrified by a request she received, to deliver a eulogy at his funeral in character as Alice Cramden. "I told them I would no more come into the kitchen as Alice than I would fly to the moon," she recounted. "Ralph is not dead. Ralph will live forever." Her refusal was a fierce defense of the line between art and life. Ralph Cramden was a character. Jackie Gleason was a man, flawed and complex, and it was the man she had just said goodbye to. Audrey Meadow's reflections in her later years weren't about tearing down a legend. Her quiet honesty simply humanized both herself and the Great One. She added depth to the story of the Honeymooners, showing us the human cost behind the timeless laughter. Her story is one of incredible resilience, a testament to a woman who navigated a volatile world with grace and professionalism. She showed that greatness isn't always kind and brilliance doesn't excuse bad behavior. Jackie Gleason will always be remembered for his comedic genius. But thanks to Audrey Meadow, we now have the full picture, the genius and the difficult man, the magic and the manipulation. Her story reminds us that behind every iconic performance, there are complex human stories of struggle and quiet strength. She didn't just play a strong woman on TV, she was one in real life. What do you think about Audrey Meadow's story? Does it change how you see the Honeymooners? Let us know in the comments below. And for more untold stories from classic TV, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.